Hello, Deanna here, and thanks so much for being here. So today's video is going to be a book review, and the book I'm reviewing is The Home for Unwanted Girls by Joanna Goodman. So I'm going to read my little summary of what this book is about. Maggie is too young at 15 to end up pregnant, and even worse in her father's eyes is that the father is French. In 1950s Quebec, tensions between French and English are high, so Maggie's father forbids her seeing Gabrielle ever again. And worse, forces Maggie to give up her brand new baby, Elodie, forcing Elodie to grow up in an orphanage. That's not the worst of it, though. Due to new Canadian laws, more funding is provided to mental institutions, and Elodie is forced to be registered at the young age of 7 as mentally insane and raised in an asylum. However, Maggie has never forgotten the baby girl she was forced to give up. She searches for her lost daughter, but will she ever find her? So this one I've had for a little while. I believe I got it in one of my bags of books that I get from my Nana-in-law, and I had heard of this book as well, but I didn't know what it was about, and I didn't realize the history behind it. Now, being a Canadian myself and living not too far from Quebec as well, growing up in Canada, I did not know about this dark history. I did not know the history of the Duplessis orphans and some of the horrors that went on and just the awful history that happened right here in Canada. I mean, sometimes growing up in Canada, it's easy to think that Canada is this wonderful, incredible, kind country, especially as that's like the stereotype of Canada, is that we're just these wonderful, kind, sweet people. But we have a dark history too, and it's not just with these orphans, it's also with the residential homes as well, the residential schools. That's a whole other thing as well, and that's a lot of what this reminded me of, is just young infants at the mercy of some horrible laws and some horrible ways of being treated and raised. And that was very emotional to read in this book, because it was well done in the book, but also just to realize that this was yet another dark underbelly of our Canadian history. So I did create a journal spread for this book as well. As you may know if you've watched my videos, I do some journal spreads in my reading journal, and I was very much taken with the image of the little girl in the little outfit. Mine isn't quite as cute. Mine is very much more cartoony than that, but I wanted to have a whole spread to this book because, one, I thought the book was just that fantastic, but I also really wanted to have a little bit about the history to kind of remind myself and realize, you know, what this book was really about. And so as you see here, I put a little blurb here about how in 1948 the Canadian government introduced a subsidy program with respect to provincial health services, and the Premier of Quebec at the time, Maurice Duplessis, I apologize if I'm mispronouncing that last name, he was pretty much the front runner of this new change, so that some homes that used to be orphanages were then transferred and ended up becoming mental asylums instead, and mental institutions. So, you know, it was the fact that there's falsely diagnosing some orphans with mental disorders enabled the Quebec institutions to receive these large subsidies from the federal government. And that's just like so disgusting in so many ways, to know that these poor children were put through this for the bottom dollar. Like, that is just, disgusting and creepy. But I'm grateful that I learned about this because I had no idea that this was a thing, and I hope that any of the families, children that are now grown affected by this, and those that maybe didn't get to grow, I hope that they find some peace and they get some justice. I know there's still some stuff going on. I was, again, rabbit holing and getting into a bit of the history. I really do tend to do that when books are based on real history, and the rabbit hole that I went on with that. So if you don't know about that, maybe search that up, especially if you're Canadian and maybe even a Quebecois and you don't know about that history. I mean, and I don't want to just shade Quebec, because I think that was just all around. So many checks and balances got lost in that, and that is just horrible in so many ways that happened. So just wow is all I will say. We need to learn from our history. Bringing it back to the book though, and the story that Joanna wrote, I don't want to take this lightly or anything, because again, it is a pretty heavy topic that is explored here, and I think it hits so close to home because it's so close to me. But it was very reminiscent of the woman in the white kimono, and that makes me reflect too, because in some ways it was like the woman in the white kimono, as sad as that is and as atrocious as that is that happened, it was almost like, oh, it happened over there, and it's like that I have to check in myself, and I have to, you know, be mindful when I'm having that kind of thought of it can happen anywhere. It can happen anywhere, and even if it is happening just quote unquote over there, does not make it less atrocious, and if anything, it's still horrible. So it's just that reflection on me while I was reading this book as well. And then yeah, I was just not aware of this disturbing part of the history of Canada. Just yet another layer that has been lifted to explore, to understand that we do not need to be complacent. We do not need to think, well, there's nothing wrong with our country. Our country is beautiful and wonderful. No, there is definitely things that we still need to atone for, and there's definitely things that we could do better learning from, and ensuring things like that never ever happen in the future. But this book itself was very well written, very engaging. It very much had me hooked on the storyline. I found it very powerful, very emotional, and very enlightening too, just bringing that spotlight to this real history in Canada. And I really did love the dual point of view that we got between the mother Maggie and then the child Elodie as they go throughout their journey. It is third person, so it's not like we're getting like first-hand accounts, but we are following them along, kind of seeing some of what they're feeling and what they're thinking through, like more of like an omnipresent type of third-party kind of narration. I gave this one 5 stars because I just thought it was so very well done, this book. It definitely makes me want to read more of Joanna Goodman's books. I know that I also want to read The Finishing School, which is another book she's written, and then there's a sequel, I believe, to this one. I'm not sure if it's in here, if it's noted, but I do know I read something about another book. No, I don't think it's here, but I think it's when I was Googling and researching, I realized there was another sequel to this, which kind of follows along with some of the after story of kind of what happened after the ending of this book. So I do want to check that out because I just want to kind of see more of what happened, and I do really like Joanna's writing. I think it's very easy to get sucked up into. She's very good at sprinkling information while also very much keeping you engaged in the story. I did find there's a lot of show instead of just like info dumping. I did find it was a lot of taking us through the events and actually showing us the events, and I love that in books. I very much love when it's an engaging story that's really keeping me hooked. And I do want to also give some trigger warnings because this book does deal not only with the abuse and things, which trigger warning for that for the children as well, but there's also some SA type components and just physical, mental, and that type of abuse as well. So just kind of be mindful of that, and it is a bit of a sensitive topic, especially when this is dealing with some real history and some real events that happened. So just be mindful when reading that this might be a fictional story within real events. It's still based on real events, so it can get a little heavy at times. But overall, I really enjoyed it. I'm really grateful that I read this one. I just thought this was such a good read. I really enjoyed this read. I really enjoyed the story and just the things that happen. I'm really glad in a lot of ways some of what happened. Yeah, I don't want to spoil anything, but it was really well done. So I really enjoy this story. And honestly, to me, a lot of it was I was just taken up so much with the actual history of the story, even more so than the story itself. But the story itself is really good too. Like the Maggie, I think, is a really great character. She's young at first. She very much idolizes her father, who owns like a seed store, and he owns his own business, and he is English and French, but he like caters more towards the English because that's the way of the future for Quebec, and he kind of looks down his nose a bit at the French, and yet his wife is French, and then he has children that, you know, have a French mom and an English dad himself. And so there's that little bit of that tone and that theme of prejudice and our preconceived notions on people, and classism as well, because he's a bit more seen as like upper class almost, quite, because he owns his own store, so he's like a working businessman. And then he looks down his nose at Maggie's love interest, Gabrielle, because Gabrielle is French, and he's also like poor, so it's kind of that bit of that class war a bit too. And like I said, that war of like the English versus the French a bit is kind of an undercurrent theme within this book, and I just found that very interesting as well to kind of explore that and read that and kind of take this knowledge from this book and kind of see some of that prejudice that can very easily happen as well. And yeah, Maggie, I think also is just, she's a fantastic character because I think her character arc is really well done. Like she starts off as like a young girl who very much idolizes her father and looks up to him, and she has that struggle a bit, especially when he is so opposed to the relationship that she has with the boy that she falls for. And then also this thing, you know, of just some of the things she learns about her father, and just her struggles with what he then, you know, puts this thing on her of this wall that comes up between them, and this way that this kind of destroys their relationship in a way. And also like how she has to kind of reconcile that and how she kind of deals with that, especially when she doesn't want to give up her child. And even though she's just a young girl herself, it's kind of like how she deals with that and wars with that, and kind of where she goes with her life in response to that. And I just thought it was really well done. It was a really interesting story, very much kept me engaged. And yes, it's just, it was a bit of a big book too, in regards to some of that. I mean, we had a bit of a love story in here. We had, like I said, the prejudice, the like socialism and like the classism, and just kind of that commentary on the Canadian government and the Quebec government and everything in there. So it's definitely quite the story, and it takes you on quite the adventure. So I very much loved this one. As I said, 5 stars, really, really loved it. I highly encourage you to check it out if you haven't read The Home for Unwanted Girls. Possibly prepare yourself for an emotional read, but it is a really good read. I'd love to know from any of you, have you read The Home for Unwanted Girls? Did you know about the history within Canada and this law that changed things and some of the repercussions that are still happening as a result? I'd love to know your thoughts. And if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. I very much appreciate it. Thank you so much for being here and watching. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, night, evening, whatever time it is, or wherever you are. Thank you so much for being here. Take care of yourselves, and you will see me next time. Bye!